Okay, that brings us to the end of local board input. Now we move to item 7, which is extraordinary items, and we have a minor verbal update here that under Standing Order 2.4.6, the meeting can accept a verbal update relating to this general business of the committee, and in this case it's the Parnell Iraqi main sewer sinkhole, so we're just going to get a bit of an update on that later in the meeting. We'll be hearing from Mark Bourne. So that doesn't require a resolution because it's just a minor verbal update and there's no decision on that one. So we'll look forward to that later on. Which brings us to item number 8. We welcome our colleagues from the Waikato Regional Council who very kindly travelled up in the train today. We've got Phil King, Director of the Regional Transport Connections, and we have Waikato Regional Council members Angela Strange and Pamela Story. Thank you for your patience. And this is an item, ladies and gentlemen, where the Waikato Regional Council would like to present to our committee on shared transport aspirations. And we had a meeting earlier in the year, and I think we've got the possibility or the opportunity here for some build rapport and some common interests. And I think today's presentation is going to be very useful in establishing and building on that relationship and seeing what we have in common and what can be developed going forward. So thank you, and welcome to you, Pamela. I think you're doing the intros.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, thank you to the committee members for allowing us to speak here today. Councillor Strange has just popped out and will join us very shortly. So my name is Pamela Story. I chair the Waikato Regional Council. And joining us here today, we've got Councillor Angela Strange, who is the Deputy Chair of our Regional Transport Committee and also Deputy Chair of our Future Proof Public Transport Subcommittee. We also are joined by Phil King, the Director of Regional Transport Connections for Waikato Regional Council. We hope that out of today, both of our councils can identify opportunities to collaborate more effectively to address the issues that impact on both of our regions. We'll go to the next slide. Just to set the scene, set the scene, this slide is to provide a bit of a picture of the Upper North Island context and demonstrate the importance of this area to the country and the national economy. Collectively, the 4 regions, Northland, Auckland, Waikato, and Bay of Plenty, represent over half of the country's population, accounting for 70% of the projected national population growth in the coming 25 years. Economically, we represent over half of the national GDP, nearly 80% of the national imports, and nearly 60% of all national exports. The Waikato region is at the heart of the Golden Triangle, and we are an essential part of this bigger picture. Our current population is over 500,000 people and is growing fast. Freight volumes are expected to grow significantly to 2030. An example, freight volumes on State Highway 1 are expected to increase up to 32%, and freight volumes on State Highway 2 are expected to increase up to 49%. The Waikato Transport Network plays a vital role in the national and regional economy and helps our people access education, jobs, and healthcare. These routes are equally essential to helping Aucklanders connect with the rest of the country. Recognizing both the challenges and the opportunities that come with these levels of growth, a joined-up approach to planning just makes good sense. And in line with that, Future Proof is our vehicle for coordinating our joint response to address these complex cross-boundary issues. We recognize our valued local government partners in Future Proof, including Auckland Council, Waikato District Council, Hamilton City Council, Matamata-Piako District Council, Waipa District Council, alongside the Waikato Regional Council. We see tremendous value in extending these partnerships with you to include wider topics and would welcome the opportunity to build our engagement with you in the coming months and years. Angela.
Yeah, thank you, Pamela. In the context set by Pamela, and in particular, recognising the increasing blurred line between our two regions, interregional transport is becoming a greater focus. We have already mentioned freight, with the Waikato region being an important hub for rail freight, with Ruakura Inland Port, Tauranga Port, Bay of Plenty Freight Hub, and the Ports of Auckland, Waikato Freight Hubs all operating. The relationship with Ports of Auckland is therefore very important. In terms of public transport connections, Waikato Regional Council is already delivering in this space. Our bold regional public transport plan, updated last year, is focused on enhancing people's lives and shaping the future with outstanding transport solutions. Our key objectives are to deliver services that achieve net neutral carbon emissions, enhancing accessibility and wellbeing. We also support investment in infrastructure to make these services efficient and effective. As part of the delivery of our plan, we are already funding and delivering services across the regional boundary. We operate 2, soon to be 3 bus routes over the regional boundary, as well as the Te Huia passenger rail service. All of these services are a success in terms of passenger growth and customer feedback, confirming that the wide range of reasons that people use PT are to access jobs, health, education and leisure opportunities in both Auckland and the Waikato. Pamela and I both travelled here today on Te Huia, and we were able to travel in comfort, doing some work, accessing the cafe and the toilets, all while getting here in a reliable journey time. We'd love for more people to experience that journey. Across all of this, there are multiple benefits to Auckland, as listed on the slide. Our services are supporting communities, but also having a direct benefit to Auckland by helping to reduce your emissions and congestions, as well as lowering your demand for parking in Auckland. From February, we'll be offering additional services on Te Huia on Thursday, Friday and Saturdays. You may also be aware that our Regional Public Transport Committee recently submitted to Auckland Transport's Regional Public Transport Plan consultation. We noted and acknowledged your support for the role of public transport in delivering lower emissions and a sustainable transport network, which, as I said, is very similar to the objectives in our Regional Public Transport Plan. Within our submission, we sought stronger recognition by Auckland of the value and role of interregional public transport services and asked you to consider supporting a number of elements. Phil will touch on these in more detail shortly, but in summary, these were asking you to become a co-funder and partner in the delivery of interregional passenger rail with services such as Te Huia. With work currently underway, the electrification to Pukekohe, we ask you to support the extension of this southwards to Hamilton and onwards to Tauranga. This will enable freight services in the future to be hauled by electrified units, reducing emissions and noise, and would enable the next generation of passenger units to be electric or hybrid. This would align them with the Auckland Metro service and enable full network access. Thirdly, supporting us in designing and building new railway stations in the North Waikato district area to provide access for rail to our growing communities and ensuring alignment and integration with the Auckland Metro standards. More broadly, you have our support for all the other rail improvements within Auckland, the investment in 3rd and 4th rail mains, level crossing upgrades and other improvements supporting efficient train movements. Efficient train movements in Auckland will also remove capacity constraints within our region and within the Golden Triangle.
Morning everyone. I'd just like to provide a couple of additional opportunities for discussion. So firstly, Te Huia even though it's hauled by diesel loco, is already reducing emissions compared to those people travelling into Auckland by car on between 70 and 80% of all services. And that will increase as our patronage grows, but it would also significantly increase as we move to electrified units over time. All of that helps reduce congestion in your region. We're also investigating the replacement of our ageing rolling stock, which actually came from Auckland in the first place many years ago. And we seek your support for that work as we continue with it. Secondly, picking up a discussion from one of our recent future-proof committee meetings, which Councillor Baker attended, there was an agreement to develop an interregional rail and passenger transport strategy. And the aim of this was to be able to look across our boundary and understand the flows and work together to set out the beginnings of a plan for this. So that work's starting to get underway and aligns well with some work that we're already doing on the vehicle kilometre travelled reduction study for the North Waikato area. And it'd be great if you were able to support us with that. Continuing, we've already heard this morning about changes to the Sustainable Public Transport Framework and recent changes to legislation. Some of those are continuing, some are now set. One of the big changes that occurred is it removed one of the barriers for interregional services. And that opens up the opportunity for us to talk more fully and in greater detail about how we might work together to plan, deliver and operate public transport services across the boundary. That works well for Greater Wellington and Horizons regional councils, and there's no reason it couldn't work well for us. We've also contributed to the work that you are doing on the programme business case for post-City Rail Link timetables and networks, and we've been working hard with your team to ensure that there are slots within that timetable for interregional passenger rail, and we'd really like to see those slots be used and then be more of those slots being used over the course of the day. Excuse me. Finally, there are opportunities for us to evolve the operating model. At the moment, our trains run from Hamilton North. That doesn't provide much of an offer for people from Auckland wanting to come south. You only have a few hours in our region. There are opportunities to think about how we would run an early morning service down from Auckland to the Waikato that would give a full day for people wanting to come to our region. Potentially that could become a permanent fixture and we could co-roster and have effectively a service that operated equally from both ends over time. But that's a discussion we'd like to open up with you at the right time.
We appreciate the relationship that we already have with Auckland Council, including Councillor Baker's membership on our Future Proof Implementation Committee and Public Transport Subcommittee. We think there are multiple opportunities to do more together, region to region and organization to organization. This could include interregional spatial planning and as well as freight and logistics coordination. As a first step, we'd like you to consider a small contribution to the development of the interregional rail and passenger transport strategy mentioned earlier. And then as part of your long-term plan development, we'd ask you to consider becoming a funding and delivery partner for bus services and train services across our shared border. And finally, as well, we'd like you to consider co-funding future service enhancements for Tahuya to eventually become a true interregional service, serving both of our communities in Auckland and into the Waikato. We're happy to take any questions and provide any answers you're seeking today, but also thank you very much for the time and consideration allowing us to present. Kia ora.
Okay, thanks very much, Pamela, Angela, and Phil, and certainly later on in our agenda we've got an item coming up on the 30-year investment program for Auckland, and certainly inter-regional train travel is very much to the fore in that. So I'll open up for questions, and the first person there with some experience in transport matters is Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just run through some numbers with you and just get some confirmation. These are answers to parliamentary questions from the Honourable David Parker, Minister of Transport. And he says up until the 31st of May this year, the total cost of operating Te Huia were, just let me get this, 13 million, and the total ticket sales and top-ups to contribute to the service, 402,000. In other words, 3.1% of the total cost of its operations are being funded by people using it, and 97% is a subsidy. Is he correct with those numbers?
Phil, are you able to provide that information?
We estimated the fare recovery ratio at around 18%, I believe. So I don't think the number is entirely aligned with ours. We provide.
Why would a Minister of Transport do these to parliamentary questions then?
We've been providing information monthly to the Minister and to several other parties within Parliament on all of the information for Te Huia since its launch.
I'll give you the numbers, 19997 and 19998 question. So it is on the parliamentary record. Would you like to give us an alternative spreadsheet in which your costs and what you think the subsidy is?
Yes, we can provide that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Williamson, for that. And we go to the next question, which is Member Ashby.
Kia ora. Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick one from me. Do you have any info on Māori patronage of the Te Huia service, by any chance?
No, I don't believe that we have specifically looked at that previously. But however, we do use electronic ticketing, so that data could be recovered for you.
Thanks. Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Chair, and I'm happy to move to when we get to that point. Just a question in regards to the population movements. And so do you have data, and are you tracking the data in regards to, I guess, the population movements between Auckland and I guess how the two regions are interacting? And so the movement of people not only on Te Huia, but coming up State Highway 1 and potentially State Highway 2 and across to and 22 into Auckland and back again in terms of work, and how, you're tracking all that data?
Yeah, Waka Kotahi is tracking the data on State Highway 1 on a daily basis, and they provide data sets to yourselves and to us that provide that information. Obviously, we have our patronage numbers for bus and train as well. So we do have a sense of those flows prior to the opening of the full Waikato Expressway, and we're tracking that following that time, yes.
And just in terms of population of that and population movement, I guess, people moving out of the Auckland region into the North Waikato, something else you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And those numbers, particularly for Pokeno as a good example, were part of our work around those North Waikato railway stations that we're investigating the recent growth trajectory and then future growth planning as part of that thinking.
And we do have considerable conversations with our local government partners, including Waikato District Council, and just noting the communities of interest that are developing just on the southern side of the Auckland border in Pokeno and Tuakau. We do see continued interest in population growth and housing development in that area. And so I suppose that one of the reasons we wanted to come in and discuss interregional transport planning with the council today was just recognizing that if we put the effort in now to ensuring that those corridors and methods of transporting people and freight are well thought out, then we're going to be able to better serve our population into the future.
Cool, thank you. If I just make a really quick comment, I mean, the value of this work is incredible. It's a great example of the governance without boundaries that we absolutely have to embrace in these two regions.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you. Just quickly, what's the primary purpose of the people using the train? And where do you see the primary purpose of your growth? Like, is it, you know, workers commuting in which direction, etc.? And how many stops are there on the line?
So the service starts in Frankton in Hamilton and stops at Rotokauri, which is the base in North Hamilton, and followed by Huntly, and then proceeds to Papakura, Puanui, and then to the Strand. So there are 3 stations within each region. Since the launch of the service, we've seen a transition of people originally started off just very interested in trains, and we had a lot of tourism, particularly interest on weekend trips. That progressed to an early interest from super gold holders. But over the last 12 months at least, we have now started to see a very significant cohort of people who are travelling for work purposes and are travelling several times a week and many times a month. And on board, you can see e-scooters, bikes, and people who have plans to move from any of those stations in Auckland to employment across the whole of the south of your area, rather than just everybody coming into the middle of Auckland. So we're continuing to monitor that, and we are undertaking customer surveys annually that just give us more insight as well.
And we have had a number of conversations with industry located in the Waikato that has expressed a desire to see further development of the services of Te Huia to facilitate flow of employees attending meetings that are partial day meetings, being able to bring employees either from the Waikato up into Auckland for those meetings or vice versa. We also have seen evidence of groups of people, whether it's through a retirement community or otherwise, that have utilized the Te Huia to travel from Auckland into Hamilton for the day, and so really see some opportunities through a greater degree of development of the service to leverage off of that desire to be able to seamlessly and easily move between the regions and take advantage of the opportunities that are provided across both of our communities.
Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I think it's a fantastic initiative and certainly something we need to be looking at more personally. You know, we're talking about commuting and the transport element of this, but I think there's a really important economic development piece. So I'm just wondering if you guys have figures in terms of, say, GDP or anything else we can hang our hats on that's an economic benefit to both sides of the boundary.
I suppose I would refer to those GDP figures that I introduced around the 4 regions as a collective. I suppose in terms of the Waikato region itself, we contribute 10% of the national GDP, and as I'm sure many of you know, that is primarily through our agricultural sector, providing significant levels of export, but also helping to feed people across the country, including here in Auckland. I suppose in terms of further detail, we could certainly pull that together and provide that.
Yeah, and just further to that, if I may, Chair. Yeah, I think the point that a lot of people seem to miss is that we don't just run a train for the sake of running a train. It's to enable people to move to jobs, to employments, for social connections as well, and also that affordable housing as well. A lot of people can't afford to house themselves in Auckland anymore and are progressively moving south into the Waikato. So enabling them to still earn that Auckland wage, living in the regions, just opens up more affordable housing along the Hamilton to Auckland corridor.
Yeah, we've got a few of those people work for Auckland Council actually in the governance section.
My dad's one of those fellas in the Waikato.
We've got a question from Councillor Newman who's online.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. Interesting presentation. I had 2 questions actually, if I may, Chair. First question is, okay, well, we can talk about the development of the stations to Metro standard. What's the region's ability to help or to meet the cost, the operating cost of those stations if they were to be built? Those stations are not cheap. There's a significant operating cost associated with that. My my expectation is that you would pick up the cost of that. And I don't know your ability to fund it. If you could comment on that.
So the example of the construction of Rotokauri Station is perhaps a good example in the Hamilton area. But Huntly Station was also significantly rebuilt to enable Te Huia. The operating costs for both of those are funded by the district. In one case Hamilton, the other one Waikato District, and we do receive subsidy from the Crown at 75% for those at the current time. So the district, Waikato District, has been the leader, the significant interested party in those new stations in their district, and they haven't identified any concerns about being able to operate those stations after they're constructed.
Okay, look, thank you. And my other question would be, look, notwithstanding the benefits of interregional travel, in relation to those locations, I would presume that you would still require capacity around park and ride. You're committed to park and ride to complement those particular station hubs to provide for interregional travel. Private vehicle movement will remain a very significant transport mode for your constituents.
So there was an indicative business case that was presented to our August committee round that provided a lot of the detail about the component parts of what would be involved in a station at Tuakau or Pokeno or Te Kaupata. And that work attempted to find a balance between providing a good level of service, but then also not increasing costs beyond a rational level to enable the construction to be completed. All of those sites returned a positive benefit cost ratio. For Tuakau, it did not include significant parking because it was felt there was land near a station that could be used for that. But for Pokeno, which has nothing at the moment, it did include a crossing of the lines to provide safe access to both platforms, as well as a large park and ride facility, particularly because of the wider zone for Pokeno being so closely located to State Highway 1 and on the corridor for people from Thames Coromandel or Waihi, as well as within that local community. So they did include those facilities, and the cost of each of those sites within different parameters was included within that work. So that is now going to proceed to more detailed business case work within the year one of the long-term plan to enable us collectively to keep that work going.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Newman. So we've just got a couple more. You're getting a bit of the Spanish Inquisition here, but there seems to be a lot of interest around the room, which is really good. So we've got Councillor Ferry, the Mayor, and Councillor Mike Lee, and that will be it.
Well, kia ora. I sort of hesitate to ask more questions about Te Huia because there's so much more to it, but it is kind of the glamour route between our two cities, and I think you can sense there's a lot of interest and even a bit of passion for it. What I'm curious about is whether there are still, well, I know there are still intercity buses that are running, but I assume those are private services. Is that correct? I had to take one earlier this year. So is there, are there any public services that you run that are buses, and why do we think people might be taking the bus instead of the train? I did it because I couldn't get a schedule that suited my time frame, so I had to catch the bus. But are there other reasons why we might need to retain a bus service once we get the times right for the train? And then I've got one other follow-up question.
Yeah, thank you, Julie, for your question. Yeah, currently intercity bus between Hamilton and Auckland would be the most direct route. We don't currently offer that route. Yeah. The bus services that we do provide are more in the North Waikato, connecting through to Pukekohe and through to Papakura as well. So that has been an initiative from Waikato District that we are trialling because we recognise that those communities up there are so, if it wasn't for a line on a piece of paper, they would be joint. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of those lines are quite artificial for our communities, yeah.
Yeah, especially when it comes to transport.
Yes.
Water you can understand, however transport just doesn't make sense in my opinion.
Cool. So there is still a private bus service. I have to say I found it much less pleasant than catching the bus, and it took an hour longer than it was supposed to. Than taking the train. It took an hour longer than it was supposed to, which was an issue with 3 children. The other question I have around that is whether we think that the fact that you have to have a B card is a barrier potentially for Aucklanders, acknowledging the national ticketing system is coming, so obviously we don't want to put a lot of resources into perhaps enabling AT hop, but is there some way that we could address that? I have a B card, but a lot of people don't. It might make it more attractive. Or do we just wait for national ticketing? I'm very open-minded about this.
Yeah, good question. In our view, the B card is working well. Bear in mind you can use your B card throughout New Zealand, and apart from 3 places. So in some ways it does suit the majority of people. However, initially it was quite an issue for our users as well, especially when they have to connect to the Auckland network. So it works both ways as well. So our teams have been really good at communicating to our patrons coming from the Waikato up to Auckland what they need to do, and on the train we sell both B cards and AT hop cards, and staff at the stations, especially Puanui on the AT side, are excellent at helping passengers out when they get to Puanui and they want to get off and on. Even when Pamela and I came through this morning, there were a number of passengers at Puanui who wanted to get on to Huia because it was the next train in the station, and for some reason they're not allowed to. So it would be great if, to maximise our asset, if we could work in a bit more with Auckland and even pick up people in Pukekohe or wherever that might work. Express from Pukekohe through to the Strand. So, yeah.
That's a really good point, I think, for us to pick up. Thanks very much. Great to have you here.
Yep, I see Director Potter making a note of that at this very instant. Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I don't want this to sound that I'm not pro-rail. I am very pro-rail, particularly for cargo, for freight. But if you look at and one of my staff who works in my office actually catches to Huia every day. Nevertheless, when you look at the costs as opposed to thing, and I'm told there's 100 people roughly who regularly catch it every day, it comes to about a $55,000 per head subsidy. And you think surely a rational thing to do would be junk this and put on 2 free buses now and open up the rail line for more cargo. The next thing about it is there seems to be a thing that people are saying this is to help people get to work. The best way of reducing greenhouse gases is to have people living near where they work. So it's trying to almost do the opposite to what it sets out to do. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if this one gets the chop. And I couldn't argue against that because the country's short of cash. We need to make progress with greenhouse gases, and that means getting trucks off the road and putting more freight onto trains. And you get a hell of a lot better thing than 100 people sitting in a thing that could be on a bus. It sounds pretty hard-nosed about it. And I'm quite happy about the idea of us working together, but I'm not going to work together to prop up things which just don't make sense. And an economic analysis of this means it makes no sense whatsoever to have Te Huia. Unless I've been given completely wrong figures, but I'm relying on figures which are presented to ministers in Parliament, and if they don't present correct figures in Parliament, people go to jail. So you'd have to say questioning those is a bit unwise. If that's what the figures are, and I've divided them, that's $55,000 a head. So what do you think about that? I mean, does that mean you wish you hadn't come up to talk to us, or does it mean that we are going to talk? Because I would like to talk, but I want to talk about things that are real. And I don't particularly want to encourage more people in Hamilton working here. Either live here and work here or get jobs there. How about that?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think we have to remember that Te Huia is a startup service and that there's been huge sunk costs with stations, with the assets of the rolling stock as well. More to your point, earlier in the meeting we heard about the silliness of taking away trolley buses, taking away things that did work in Auckland. And I would hate to look back and think that we took away Te Huia and we kick ourselves in the future. I grew up in Auckland, down in Manurewa. We were always talking about trains and connections out to the airport. And, it never happened while I lived here. I would just hate for us to come this far into the startup 5-year trial. We're 3 years in now. Let's finish the trial, give it a go, and see what the public gives us. We know there's a cost of living crisis. People can't afford $3.50, we're hearing $3.80 per litre to travel up to Auckland and coming down from Auckland down to the Waikato. But
Get a job
they can afford the train trip. And if you've got kids, you've got family, then it is a more affordable thing. Now, on our figures that we have, we've got 18% fare recovery from passengers. And that is looking at the subsidy from Waka Kotahi. And that's in line with other PT that we run as well with the Waka Kotahi subsidy. And most of those other services, even within Auckland, return a similar amount on fare box recovery.
Not according to the figures that we were given from the parliamentary report, and I've got to rely on those as being rational. So I'm just, and when you say you can't afford, our people can't afford any more rates. People can't afford more taxes. Nothing is free. Money just doesn't come out of the air. It comes from people. And so I remain a long way short of being convinced that that's even remotely rational. And that's despite the fact that one of my staff catches it every day and smiles at me and says it's wonderful and enjoyable and cheap, which it is for him. But somebody else is paying for that. And that's money that could go for freight rail. So that's your answer, and that was my question, so well done. But it doesn't mean I don't want to talk to you still.
Thank you for that, your comments, Mr. Mayor. I think that I had a great conversation with your staff member this morning while we were riding up on the Te Huia, and I know that he is quite a fan. We do recognize that these are complex conversations that we have ahead of us, and I suppose that's why we wanted to frame up this conversation as much broader than just the Te Huia. We have made the commitment to get our figures through to you so that we're working off of the same numbers. And I think that our council would certainly support your call for more effective freight movements. And I think that there is an avenue for our councils to work together to ensure that the voice of both Auckland Council and Waikato Regional Council are heard around those interregional transport planning tables. So, kia ora.
Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you very much for coming along today and sharing your interregional rail vision and reminding us that we're a regional council too. Just in regard to Te Huia, there seems to be, incidentally, one of your ratepayers is a staff member here, Jason Howarth, and he is a regular commuter on Te Huia. I suggest that the Waikato Regional Council gives him some sort of medal or something as a poster child. But anyway, he's very, very loyal and promoter of Te Huia. There seems to me two constraints in regard to patronage, and that is the journey time. So what ideas, I understand it's about 2 hours, 40 minutes, but that may be out of date, but what ideas have you in Kiwi Rail to try and speed that up? Because I think in the 70s it was faster than that.
Yep, and that is a significant issue for people who are travelling frequently on the train. we are constrained by the condition of the tracks. We're constrained by the speed of other trains on the line. And certainly south of Pukekohe, that can be quite a significant constraint. But that's really the area where we have the opportunity to speed up, because once we get to Pukekohe, we're travelling at the same speed as the fleet within the Auckland metro area. So at the moment, we're going through the closure that's in place between Pukekohe and Papakura, which has added nearly 10 minutes to the journey every time. But then we follow your stopping services up through there. So that's why our interest in the investments that are identified for Auckland are of benefit to the Waikato services. Being able to use those other lines as they come on board, being able to take advantage of investments that you're making in the rail network here will reduce the journey time for us as well.
The other constraint would seem to be, and I had some involvement with this some years ago, the endpoint station. Auckland changed, as you would know, of course, its main station from the traditional one at the Strand to Britomart. My colleague, Councillor Fletcher, the Mayor of Auckland at the time, had a lot to do with that project, but that made an enormous difference to patronage within Auckland, and it was actually absolutely ideal for the overlander, the Northern Explorer, Wellington, Auckland train service. And then, unfortunately, AT evicted the overlander, the Northern Explorer, out to the Strand, and the Strand has always been suboptimal as a station. So I think you should know that the City Rail Link will free up platform space, but unfortunately AT intends to deconstruct 2 platforms there, which I think is not wise. But that's one concern. The other concern is your own end. You leave from Frankton Junction, but are there any plans to open the Hamilton Central station? Is that happening? Or I'm a wee bit out of touch. I understand that was the first underground railway station in New Zealand. So, but it's not being used now, or is it?
Yeah, great questions. Thank you. Just if I can take the first question about the Strand. Currently, because Te Hui is pulled by a diesel, we're not allowed into Britomart. However, with the continuation of the service, we're investigating electrified units, trains that will seamlessly fit in with the Auckland metro trains. So once we change to those sorts of rolling stock, then Britomart is a possibility, joining in with the CRL as well. To your second question about the Hamilton Central Station, Hamilton City does all our rail infrastructure within Hamilton, and alongside Tainui, who owns the land above that central station, they are investigating the possibility of that. However, with the diesels at the moment, the gas and the fumes makes it just not workable at the moment. So that key piece that I mentioned before about the electrification from Pukekohe down to Hamilton and then out east to Tauranga, it would just be a real game changer in terms of the Kaimai tunnel through to Tauranga for our freight. At the moment, our freight train drivers have to wear a mask through the tunnel. And then the underground station within Hamilton could also be looked at as well, just by changing from diesel to either electric or tri-mode locos. Thank you.
Good questions, Councillor Lee. We've got a list of questioners keep going, so I'm going to, we could go on all day here. There's some really great answers, and it's a good sign of the potential cooperation. So I'm going to call it to a close after the last 5, which, and I'd appreciate if you could expedite things. Councillor Williamson, Walker, Councillor Foley, and finally Councillor Bartley. Thank you.
Just to say that there's so many pieces of information that are coming from central government questions that sort of are contrary to what you're saying. For example, in the greenhouse gas emission space, you were saying that each person travelling on the train reduces greenhouse gas emissions. But in the report that I've got here, it's suggesting that each car journey, assuming a single person in each unit, emits 19.9 kilograms of greenhouse gas. And the Te Huia service currently, with its passenger levels, emits 31.6 kilos per person for each journey. So when you come here and tell us you're saving greenhouse gas emissions, the figures that I'm looking at are saying it's more per person by the train because of the diesel locomotive and so on. Do you have, and I'd really like you to furnish us with these, way better statistics than what I'm getting from both government and the Waikato Regional Council's survey they did, which shows that the subsidy was in fact 3%. They said $12 from the fare-paying passenger and $280 from the subsidy. So it makes it very hard for us to sit here getting stuff from you when there is people like government ministers and the Waikato Regional Council giving contradictory numbers.
Yeah, okay. I think we've heard that we're going to get those figures.
Well, greenhouse gas stuff as well.
Yeah. So we'll leave it. We won't repeat what's already been answered.
Yeah, I mean, without having any of those in front of me, it's very hard to be able to answer.
Okay, so we'll get that for you, Councillor Williamson. Councillor Walker?
So my question follows on from Councillor Williamson. So are you foresighting and modelling the huge disruptive and rapid impacts caused by the uptake of electric vehicles, which effectively means that it's far cheaper for someone, particularly if there are a number of people in the car, to use that mode of transport rather than Te Huia? And from the perspective of reducing greenhouse gases, it is far more efficient than even Te Huia if it's electrified, unless it happened to be full to the brim. And this disruption is being driven by the marketplace and economics, and it is rapid. So are you modelling that and the impact of that on this service? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think an electric vehicle is still a vehicle. It's still a car on the road. It's still causing congestion, wear and tear on the road, parking. And for starters, you need to be able to afford to buy an electric vehicle. Now, we know the market is shifting and quite quickly, so I do recognise that. What we are attempting to do is mode choice. So we're not forcing anyone to take the train. We're just giving people options. Not everyone can afford an electric vehicle, and those who most can't afford an electric vehicle are paying a lot for petrol hungry cars at the moment. So yeah, we're just looking at an equitable transition through that. And I have forgotten your other question if there was one.
I think you covered them off.
Okay, maybe those figures need to be updated because EVs come.
Councillor Foley?
Kia ora, thank you, Chair, and thank you for travelling up to present to us. I'm supportive of more options for travel. I've lived in places like Japan, which have the same land mass as New Zealand, but 150 million people. So for them, transport has been an issue since World War II, and they handle it much better than we do. I've just got questions because I know in Auckland, you know, this issue about living close to where you work, I accept that, but most of the jobs for the country are concentrated here in Auckland, but we have a huge workforce shortage. Even in terms of teachers, before COVID, I was on the Board of Trustees of a school in South Auckland. We just could not get teachers. Previously, teachers would apply from Waiuku, from Huntly, and places like that, and they would travel to teach in South Auckland. But now, because of even then, the cost of housing, the cost of petrol, that was prohibitive, and so teachers just weren't applying to come and teach in South Auckland. So we were having to compete and then offer all these other things. In terms of the stats and the way that you've presented your presentation, do you have some stats to offer us about what the difference is in the cost of living in Huntly and in Hamilton, what the difference is in rent, for example, and why a lot of people might find it attractive to live in Huntly or in Hamilton, but then travel to work up here in Auckland. Kia ora.
I don't have those types of statistics with me here today, but I suppose through you, Mr. Chair, I would just like to recognize, obviously, the significant level of interest around the table in what we're discussing today, and also there's clearly some additional information that we could draw together that would help support this conversation and take it forward. So I suppose that just would really love to encourage another opportunity for us to come together and perhaps give some additional perspective to answer these questions as they're coming up. That'd be great.
Kia ora. Thank you. Thank you.
And final question, Councillor Bartley.
Kia ora, Chair. Thank you. I appreciate you three coming up here for this meeting, for this mahi and what you're raising, because it's so good to be proactive about it in our planning interregionally, as opposed to trying to be in a crisis situation and then we've got to come and beg you guys for water. So I really appreciate this proactive approach that's being taken here. I see the benefits, and I'm sorry that you've had to defend Te Huia to us. You know, I have family that can't afford to live in Auckland. They live in the Waikato because it's cheaper. And so that means that I have family that come over from Samoa, and instead of coming into the city and coming in to stay with us, they're straight on Te Huia, going down to our family that's moved out of Auckland because it's too expensive to live here. So I see the benefits of it. I see the point that the Mayor's raising about freight. So my question really is just to find out what our next steps are, because clearly there's a lot of interest in what you've brought to the table. And so I hope there is a next step in how we do this working together interregionally, because it's just going to be more happening between the two as more of our communities move out of Auckland into your area, but still come up here for work.
Thank you, Councillor, for raising that. And I suppose that, as I indicated in my part of the korero today, I really would like us to expand our view of the various topics that we could work more collaboratively on. While we're here talking about transport, particularly today, I think there are a wide variety of issues that if we found a means for Auckland Council and the councils across the Waikato region, but particularly Waikato Regional Council, if we can find an avenue to have those joined up conversations so that we can plan effectively, not just in terms of infrastructure, but how our communities are shaped and formed, how they're connected, how we connect individuals with employment, with education, with healthcare. The more robust and joined up those conversations can be between our councils, then the more prepared we are going to be to address the inevitable population development and growth and meet the needs of those communities going forward. So thank you for raising that. We certainly are positive about that further engagement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bartley. So we have a recommendation up on the screen now. It's been moved by Councillor Baker. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Foley. I'll open it up to any comments people have. A very short one from Councillor Hills.
Kia ora, Chair. Thank you. Just want to thank you for coming. The relationship is really important between your council and ours, as Councillor Bartley said, you know, especially in the water space over the last few years. I hope you haven't felt like it was a bit of an inquisition. You can clearly hold your own, but just appreciate the information, and we do need to continue to have a positive relationship, even if figures aren't exactly the same as each other's or whatever. So I really appreciate you coming here and presenting to us, and hope we can work together on other issues as well. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Councillor Hill. Just before I put it to the vote, our Director, Barry Potter, he will be, to answer Councillor Bartley's question, will be following up with our friends at Waikato Regional Council. And I think behoves me to thank you for showing the initiative. Interregional cooperation is a no-brainer really in terms of both the areas we represent and particularly our huge growth down south. I guess if we go back to our presentation from our union friends earlier on today, we see the opportunities that have been lost, but that can be regained. And often, there has to be an initial period where things get started, and then in a few years' time, the results can be quite dramatic. It happened with our Northern Busway. We used to spot the bus back in the early 2000s or whenever it was. You hardly ever see them. Now it's just a steady fleet of buses going up and down there. So we recognise that these sorts of things take a bit of foresight, and we appreciate the pivotal role that you have played in this to date, and we look forward to continuing this cooperation. So thank you very much, and I hope you don't have to wait around to 5:35 for the return trip. I can get
There's plenty to do in Auckland, isn't there?
Yeah, yes. Okay,
thank you.
Moved and seconded. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you again.